When Marcus Henderson broke ground on his spiral barn in the spring of 1987, the neighbors gathered along the fence line like crows on a wire, watching with a mixture of amusement and pity. There he was, that stubborn old fool, marking out a curve in the earth where any sensible man would have laid a rectangle. 63 years old and apparently losing his mind right there in full view of Timber County, Nebraska. Old Frank Paulson leaned against his truck and shook his head slowly. "That man is building a snail shell," he said to anyone who would listen. "A giant snail shell for hay. I've seen some foolishness in my 40 years of farming, but this takes the cake." This absolutely takes the cake. Martha Greenwood, who ran the feed store in town, was less diplomatic. She told her customers that Marcus Henderson had finally cracked under the pressure of losing his wife the year before. "Grief does strange things to a man," she would say while measuring out chicken feed. "Makes him think he knows better than generations of farmers who came before. Makes him waste good money on nonsense." But Marcus Henderson was not crazy, and he was not grieving carelessly. He was building something that would change farming in the Great Plains forever, though nobody knew it yet. He was building a structure that would preserve hay perfectly for 10 years, 20 years, perhaps longer. He was building a barn that worked with the principles of nature rather than against them, and the fact that it looked strange to conventional eyes meant nothing to him at all. The design was simple in concept, but radical in execution. Instead of the standard rectangular barn with its straight walls and peaked roof, Marcus was constructing a spiral that coiled inward like a nautilus shell, with the walls gradually decreasing in height as they curved toward the center. The outer wall stood 22 feet tall, built from local limestone he had quarried himself over the previous winter. The spiral made exactly 3 complete rotations before reaching the center point, covering a total diameter of 84 feet. The floor sloped gently downward following the spiral path, dropping 2 inches every 12 feet, creating a natural drainage system that required no pumps or channels. Marcus had spent 3 years designing this barn, 3 years of calculations and observations and failed prototypes built in miniature. He had studied the way air moved through caves, the way ancient grain silos in the Middle East had preserved wheat for centuries, the way his own grandmother had kept root vegetables fresh in her underground cellar long past when they should have rotted. He had read obscure agricultural journals from Denmark and Switzerland, where farmers had experimented with circular storage systems in the 1920s. He had corresponded with a professor at the University of Illinois who had published a paper on airflow patterns in spiral structures. The key, Marcus had learned, was creating a constant, gentle air circulation that prevented moisture from settling while avoiding the harsh drying effects of direct wind. Conventional rectangular barns created dead zones where air stagnated and damp spots where mold could take hold. They required expensive ventilation systems, fans and vents, and careful monitoring. Even then, hay could spoil if conditions were not perfect. Farmers expected to lose 10 to 15% of their hay to mold and decomposition each year. It was simply accepted as the cost of doing business. Marcus refused to accept it. He had watched his father lose entire seasons of hay to mold. He had seen neighbors forced to feed their cattle spoiled hay during hard winters, leading to sick animals and financial ruin. He had calculated that over his lifetime of farming, he had lost the equivalent of 3 full years of hay production to waste and spoilage. 3 years, the number haunted him. So, when Helen passed away in the autumn of 1986, leaving him alone on the 200 acres they had worked together for 37 years, Marcus made a decision. He would build the barn he had been designing in secret all those years. He would prove that his theories were sound. He would create something that would outlast him, something that would make the hard work of farming just a little bit easier for whoever came after. The construction began on March 15, 1987. Marcus hired 2 men from town to help with the heavy lifting, young guys who needed work and did not ask too many questions about why the barn was going up in such a strange shape. Tommy Brewster was 24, saving money to buy his own place. Danny Park was 19, still trying to figure out what to do with his life. Both of them thought Marcus was eccentric but harmless, and the pay was fair, so they showed up every morning at 7 and did what he asked. The first task was excavating the foundation trench, which followed the spiral path exactly. Marcus had marked it out with stakes and white string, creating a curving line that looked like nothing so much as a child's drawing of a snail. The trench needed to be 30 inches deep and 18 inches wide, filled with gravel for drainage and then reinforced with concrete. It took them 3 weeks to complete, working in the early spring mud, fighting frost heaves and unexpected groundwater. Frank Paulson drove by almost every day, slowing down to stare. One afternoon he pulled over and walked up to where Marcus was guiding the concrete mixer truck along the spiral path. "Frank," Marcus said by way of greeting, not pausing in his work. "Marcus, what in God's name are you doing here?" Frank asked, though he already knew the answer because everyone in Timber County knew by now. Everyone had an opinion. "Building a barn," Marcus replied, gesturing for the truck driver to pour another section. "That's not a barn, Marcus, that's a goddamn cinnamon roll." Frank's face was red, though whether from sun or frustration was hard to tell. "You're making yourself a laughing stock. People are talking. Let them talk," Marcus said calmly. He had expected this. He had prepared for it mentally during those long winter nights of planning. The talking did not bother him, only the building mattered. Frank threw up his hands and walked back to his truck, muttering about stubbornness and fools and money wasted. Tommy and Danny exchanged glances but said nothing. They had learned that Marcus did not explain himself unless asked directly, and even then his answers were brief and practical. He was not interested in defending his vision, he was interested in manifesting it. By mid-April, the foundation was complete and cured, a pale ribbon of concrete spiraling across the field. Marcus stood at the center point and looked outward along the curve, feeling a satisfaction he had not felt in years. It was real now. It existed in 3 dimensions instead of just on paper. The most important phase was about to begin. The limestone walls went up slowly, each stone carefully selected and placed. Marcus had spent the previous winter quarrying limestone from a deposit on the eastern edge of his property, splitting and shaping hundreds of blocks by hand. Limestone was ideal for this purpose because it breathed, allowing moisture to pass through while maintaining structural integrity. It stayed cool in summer and provided thermal mass in winter. It was also beautiful, varying in color from pale cream to warm gold, each block unique. He taught Tommy and Danny the art of dry stone wall construction, an ancient technique that used no mortar. The stones were fitted together like a puzzle, each one locked in place by the weight and angles of its neighbors. It required patience and a good eye, the ability to look at an irregular stone and know exactly where it would fit in the growing structure. The boys were skeptical at first, used to modern construction with its concrete blocks and rebar and quick results. But as the wall grew and they began to understand the logic of it, they became invested in the craft. The spiral shape meant that no dissections of wall were quite the same. The curve constantly changed, requiring constant adjustment and attention, but this was also what made it strong. The spiral distributed forces evenly so that wind pressure or the weight of hay pushing outward was automatically channeled along the curve rather than stressing any single point. Marcus had calculated that this design could withstand winds up to 90 miles per hour without reinforcement, far stronger than any rectangular barn. By June, the walls were chest high all the way around the spiral, and the barn was beginning to draw more attention. People from town drove out on Sunday afternoons to look at the strange structure taking shape in Marcus Henderson's field. Most of them thought it was a folly, an old man's expensive hobby. Some laughed openly. A few admired the craftsmanship even if they doubted the purpose. Martha Greenwood organized a prayer circle at the Methodist Church specifically to pray for Marcus Henderson's troubled mind. She meant well in her way, but the condescension stung. Marcus heard about it from Danny's mother, who attended that church and felt obligated to tell him what was being said. "He's not right since Helen passed," Martha had told the group. "We need to pray that he comes back to his senses before he bankrupts himself with this foolishness." Marcus did not respond publicly, but that night he sat at his kitchen table with his notebook spread before him, double-checking his calculations for the 100th time. The mathematics were sound, the physics were proven, the historical examples existed. He was not mad, and he was not wrong. He just needed to finish the work and let results speak for themselves. The roof design was perhaps the most innovative aspect of the entire structure. Instead of a traditional peaked roof or even a simple slanted cover, Marcus designed a roof that followed the spiral down, creating a continuous descending surface from the outer edge to the center. The roof was supported by curved laminated beams that he had special ordered from a manufacturer in Wisconsin, explaining his requirements in such precise detail that the engineers there became fascinated by the project and gave him a discount, wanting to see if it would work. The beams arrived in July on a flatbed truck, each one a graceful arc of laminated Douglas fir, strong as steel and light as the engineering of nature itself. Installing them was the most technically challenging part of the construction. Each beam had to be positioned exactly, anchored to the stone walls with custom-made brackets that Marcus had welded himself in his workshop during the spring evenings. Tommy and Danny worked from scaffolding, learning to trust the strength of the spiral structure as they climbed higher. Frank Paulson stopped by during the roof installation, unable to contain his curiosity any longer. He stood watching as Marcus directed the placement of a beam, calling out measurements and angles. When they broke for lunch, Frank approached. "I'll give you this much, Marcus," Frank said, looking up at the curved beams radiating from the center like the ribs of some great creature. "It's impressive. Still don't see how it's going to keep hay any better than a regular barn, but it's impressive." Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead and took a drink from his water jug before responding. "You know how hay spoils, Frank." "Course I do. Moisture. Gets damp, starts heating up. Mold takes over, right?" Marcus agreed. "And why does it get damp in a regular barn?" Frank shrugged. "Rain gets in if the roof leaks. Humidity from the ground just happens. It happens because air doesn't move right," Marcus said. "In a rectangular barn, you get dead spots where air just sits, moisture settles in those spots. You get temperature differences between the walls and the center, causes condensation. The hay closest to the walls spoils first, right?" Frank nodded slowly, seeing where this was going. "This design eliminates dead spots," Marcus continued. "Air enters at the outer edge, flows naturally along the spiral path toward the center, and exits through the cupola at the top. Constant gentle circulation, no fans needed. The stone walls regulate temperature and humidity, breathing out moisture but keeping the hay dry. The descending roof means rain and snow slide off naturally, no valleys to collect water. And the spiral shape means I can access any section of hay without disturbing the rest, rotating through the stored hay in the same pattern it was stored, first in, first out." Frank was quiet for a long moment, processing this. "That's assuming it works like you think it will," he finally said. "That's assuming that," Marcus agreed. "Guess we'll find out come harvest." The roof itself was constructed from cedar shingles over a layer of tar paper over tongue and groove planks. Marcus chose cedar for its natural resistance to rot and its ability to expand and contract with weather without cracking. He arranged the shingles in an overlapping spiral pattern that followed the curve of the roof, creating a surface that would shed water and a continuous flow from outside to inside, where a central drain would carry it away underground. At the very center of the roof, Marcus installed a cupola, a small tower with louvered vents on all four sides. This was the key to the ventilation system. Hot air, being lighter than cool air, would naturally rise to the highest point and exit through the cupola. This would create a gentle suction effect, drawing fresh air in at ground level along the entire outer edge of the spiral. The air would circulate through the hay, carrying away moisture and heat before rising to escape through the top. No electricity needed, no moving parts to break. Just physics and design working together. By August, the barn was structurally complete, a magnificent spiral of gold and limestone and weathered cedar rising from the Nebraska prairie like some ancient temple. The total cost had been $28,000, nearly every penny Marcus had saved over his lifetime of farming, plus the proceeds from selling 40 acres of land he no longer had the energy to work. People in town knew this, and it made them even more convinced that he had lost his mind. $28,000 for a fancy hay barn when a pole barn could be built for a tenth of that cost. But standing back and looking at his creation, Marcus felt no regret. The barn was beautiful, yes, but more importantly, it was right. Every curve, every stone, every beam had been placed with intention and understanding. He had built something that honored the principles he had spent a lifetime learning. Whether it proved him right or wrong, whether people laughed or admired, at least he had tried. At least he had taken his shot at improving the ancient art of farming. The first test came during the harvest of 1987. Marcus cut his alfalfa in late August, timing it for the brief window of perfect weather that would allow the hay to dry properly in the field before baling. He worked alone with his ancient tractor and baler, the same equipment his father had used, making his way across the fields in ever-narrowing rectangles until the hay was gathered into neat cylindrical bales scattered across the stubble. Then came the hard part, loading and transporting the bales into the spiral barn. Marcus had designed a system for this, of course. He had thought through every aspect of the operation. The bales would be stacked along the outer edge of the spiral first, creating the first layer. Then the next harvest would fill the next section of the spiral, and so on, moving gradually inward with each cutting. When it came time to feed the hay, he would start at the outer edge, using the oldest hay first, working his way inward in the same spiral pattern. Tommy and Danny came back to help with the stacking, curious to see the barn in use. They spent 3 days moving bales, learning the rhythm of the spiral, understanding how the space worked. The barn could hold approximately 450 large round bales, which Marcus calculated was enough to feed his 40 head of cattle for nearly 2 years if necessary. That was unprecedented storage for a barn this size. Rectangular barns wasted so much space in corners and access aisles. The spiral eliminated that waste. As they worked, Marcus showed them how he had marked each section of the spiral with small brass plates embedded in the floor, numbered from 1 to 36. Each plate corresponded to a section that could hold approximately 12.5 bales. This numbering system would allow him to keep precise records of when hay was stored and when it should be used, rotating stock perfectly. The barn also had another feature that Marcus had not advertised but was proud of nonetheless. He had designed the spiral so that the hay itself, once stacked, would contribute to the stability and insulation of the structure. The bales would act as thermal mass, absorbing heat during the day and releasing it slowly at night, moderating temperature swings. They would also dampen sound and vibration, creating a peaceful environment that Marcus found himself enjoying even before the barn was full. By mid-September, the first harvest was stored, filling the outer rotation of the spiral. The barn still smelled of fresh-cut hay and new cedar and the limestone dust that hung in the air whenever anyone moved through the space. Marcus spent an evening walking the spiral path from outside to center and back again, running his hands along the stone walls, checking the fit of every beam, listening to the space. He could hear it working. The air moved through the barn with a sound like distant breathing, a gentle whisper of circulation. He could feel the temperature difference between the outer edge, which was still warm from the afternoon sun stored in the limestone, and the center, which was notably cooler. The system was functioning exactly as he had designed it to function. The physics were playing out in reality just as they had on paper. But the real test would come with time, weeks and months and years. That was when he would know if his theories about preservation were correct. That was when the skeptics would either be proven right or be forced to acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, the old man had known what he was doing all along. October brought the second cutting of alfalfa, smaller than the first but good quality. Marcus repeated the process, this time filling the second section of the spiral. The routine was becoming familiar now, the rhythm of harvest and storage flowing naturally. He kept meticulous records in a leather-bound journal, noting the date each section was filled, the moisture content of the hay, the weather conditions, the temperature inside the barn. He also began a practice that would continue for years, taking weekly samples from random bales throughout the barn and testing them for moisture, mold spores, and nutritional content. He had purchased a basic testing kit from an agricultural supply company, and though the tests were simple, they would provide valuable data over time. Science required measurement, and Marcus was determined to document everything. Winter came early that year, with the first hard freeze hitting in mid-November. Marcus began feeding hay from the outermost section of the spiral, the hay that had been stored first and had now spent 2 months in the barn. He broke open the first bale with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety, knowing that this moment would tell him if the barn was working. The hay was perfect, dry, fragrant, green as the day it had been cut. No musty smell, no dark spots indicating mold, no heating. He pulled apart the bale and examined it closely, finding nothing but clean, preserved alfalfa. The cattle ate it eagerly, showing none of the reluctance they sometimes exhibited with hay that had begun to spoil. Marcus tested several more bales over the following weeks, randomly selecting them from different positions in the storage area. Every single one was in excellent condition. The barn was maintaining consistent temperature and humidity throughout its entire volume, exactly as designed. The spiral airflow was preventing any pockets of stagnant air where moisture could accumulate. He did not tell anyone about these early successes. There was no point in claiming victory after just a few months. The real test would come over years, not weeks. So he continued his routine, feeding his cattle, testing his hay, recording his data, and waiting for time to prove or disprove his theories. The winter of 1987-88 was harsh but not exceptional by Nebraska standards. Temperatures dropped below zero regularly, and several significant snowstorms blanketed the county. Marcus noticed that snow would fall on the spiral roof and then slowly melt from the center outward, the heat rising from the stored hay and the animals below warming the roof just enough to prevent dangerous ice dams from forming. Another benefit he had not fully anticipated but was pleased to observe. Frank Paulson stopped by one afternoon in January, ostensibly to borrow a tool but really to check on how Marcus was managing. The two men had been neighbors for decades, and despite Frank's vocal skepticism about the spiral barn, there was genuine friendship beneath the disagreement. "How's your fancy barn holding up, Marcus?" Frank asked as they stood in Marcus's workshop, breath fogging in the cold air. "Working fine," Marcus replied, not elaborating. "Hey, keeping all right, seems to be." Frank waited for more information, but Marcus was not forthcoming. Finally, Frank laughed and shook his head. "You're a stubborn old goat, you know that?" "Been told that once or twice," Marcus agreed with a slight smile. "Well, if you need anything, if that crazy barn of yours falls down or whatever, you let me know. You hear?" "I hear." "Thanks, Frank." After Frank left, Marcus returned to the project he had been working on, a detailed scale model of the barn that he was building from balsa wood and glue. He wanted a three-dimensional representation that he could use to explain the design to anyone who might be interested. He suspected that interest would be limited, but the model pleased him regardless. It was beautiful in its own right, the curves and proportions evident even at small scale. Spring of 1988 brought another growing season, another round of hay cutting and storage. Marcus filled the third rotation of the spiral with the first cutting, then part of the fourth rotation with the second cutting. He was now feeding hay from sections that had been stored for 6 months, 9 months. The quality remained excellent. The barn's preservation system was exceeding even his optimistic projections. Word began to spread, not through any announcement from Marcus, but simply through observation. Other farmers noticed that Marcus's cattle looked healthier than usual, their coats glossy, their weight good. They noticed that he was not complaining about moldy hay, not throwing out spoiled bales, not supplementing with expensive grain to make up for poor quality forage. Something was different. Denny Park, who had moved on to working for another farmer after the barn construction was complete, mentioned to his new employer that all the hay in Marcus's spiral barn seemed to stay perfect. The employer, a younger man named Robert Chen, who had recently bought the old Swenson place, was intrigued. He drove out to Marcus's farm one evening in May to see for himself. Marcus was welding a broken gate when Robert arrived. The younger man introduced himself, though Marcus knew who he was. Everyone in the county knew everyone else, or at least knew of them. "Mr. Henderson, I hope you don't mind me stopping by unannounced," Robert began. "I wanted to ask you about your barn, the spiral one." "What about it?" Marcus set down his welding torch and lifted his face shield. "Is it true the hay stays good in there? Like, really good, not just acceptable?" Marcus considered the question. "Come on," he said. "I'll show you." They walked to the barn together, Marcus explaining the basic principles as they went. Robert listened intently, asking intelligent questions, clearly someone who understood both farming and physics. Inside the barn, Marcus broke open a bale that had been stored for 10 months, letting Robert examine it closely. "This is incredible," Robert said, running the hay through his fingers. "This looks like it was baled yesterday." "How much did you lose to mold?" "None so far," Marcus replied. "Not a single bale," Robert looked up sharply. "None, in 10 months, none." The young farmer walked the spiral path slowly, looking at everything, touching the stone walls, studying the roof structure, thinking. At the center, he stopped and turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. "This could change everything," he said quietly. "Do you realize that? If this works long term, if hay can really be stored for years without degradation, it completely changes the economics of farming. No more losses to spoilage, no more emergency hay purchases during drought years. True long-term food security for livestock. That's the idea," Marcus agreed. "Would you be willing to share your design?" Robert asked directly. "I'm not asking to copy it exactly, but the principles, the measurements, the things you learned building it." Marcus was quiet for a moment, thinking of all the farmers who had mocked him, all the people who had called him crazy. It would have been understandable if he wanted to keep his knowledge to himself, let them figure it out on their own. But that had never been his way. Knowledge hoarded was knowledge wasted. "I'll do better than that," Marcus said. "I'll give you a complete set of plans and help you build one if you want. Only thing I ask is that you document your results like I've been doing. We need data. Real science requires multiple examples, not just one old man's barn." Robert shook his hand gratefully, and that was the beginning of what would eventually be called the Spiral Barn movement, though that name would not emerge for several more years. For now, it was just two farmers standing in an unusual barn, discussing possibilities and planning futures. The second spiral barn was built in the summer of 1988 on Robert Chen's property. Robert modified the design slightly, making his barn smaller to accommodate his needs, but keeping all the essential principles intact. Marcus consulted on the project, and Tommy and Danny, hearing about it, volunteered their time to help. They'd become invested in the concept, proud of their role in building the first barn, eager to see if the success could be replicated. This barn went up faster than Marcus's had, the construction crew now experienced with the techniques and the challenges. It was completed in just under 3 months, a graceful spiral of limestone and timber rising from what had been a conventional farm in the northeastern corner of Timber County. Robert began using it immediately, and he was as meticulous as Marcus about documentation, keeping detailed records of every bale stored and tested. By the fall of 1988, Marcus's barn had been in operation for over a year, and the hay quality remained exceptional. He now had bales that had been stored for 14 months, showing no signs of deterioration whatsoever. The oldest hay was indistinguishable from fresh hay in terms of moisture content, color, smell, and nutritional value. The barn was working better than he had dared to hope. Frank Paulson finally admitted he had been wrong on a cold November evening when he and Marcus were having coffee in Marcus's kitchen. The two men had developed a tradition of these evening visits, discussing farming and weather and politics and life. "I was wrong about your barn, Marcus," Frank said abruptly. "I've been watching and I've been hearing things, and I was wrong. That's a hell of a thing you built." "Appreciate you saying so," Marcus replied. "Question is, what now? You planning to build more? Sell the design?" Marcus shook his head. "I'm not interested in money from this. I built it to solve a problem. If other folks want to build their own, they're welcome to the plans. Robert Chen is proving it works for different scales and conditions. That's enough for me." "You're a better man than most," Frank said. "A lot of people would try to patent something like this, make a fortune. Can't patent principles of nature," Marcus replied. "Besides, what would I do with a fortune at my age? I've got everything I need." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching snow begin to fall outside the kitchen window. Finally, Frank spoke again. "You know what you've done, don't you? You've built something that's going to outlast both of us. Something that actually helps people. That's rare, Marcus, that's damn rare." Marcus did not respond, but he felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee or the wood stove. Helen would have been proud, he thought. She had always believed in his tinkering, his constant questioning of conventional wisdom. She would have loved to see the barn working, loved to see other farmers taking interest. He wished she could be here for this. The winter of 1988-89 brought a series of storms that tested the barn in new ways. High winds, heavy snow loads, and extreme temperature fluctuations came in waves throughout December and January. Marcus monitored the barn closely during these events, checking for any signs of stress or failure. The structure remained solid, the stone walls and curved beams easily handling forces that would have damaged conventional barns. Several rectangular barns in the county suffered roof collapses that winter from snow loads. The spiral barn shed snow naturally, the curved surface preventing accumulation. More importantly, through all the extreme weather, the interior environment remained stable. Temperature fluctuations inside the barn were minimal, rarely varying more than 10 degrees regardless of outside conditions. Humidity stayed within the optimal range for hay preservation. The airflow continued uninterrupted, the physics of the design overcoming the chaos of the weather. By the spring of 1989, 2 years after breaking ground, Marcus had definitive proof that his barn worked as designed. He had hay that was 18 months old, stored through a Nebraska winter and summer that remained in perfect condition. He invited the county agricultural extension agent, a woman named Dr. Patricia Morrison, to examine his storage system and his data. Dr. Morrison spent an entire day at the farm testing hay samples, reviewing Marcus's meticulous records, examining the barn structure, asking hundreds of questions. She was thorough and skeptical in the best scientific tradition, unwilling to make claims without evidence. "But the evidence was overwhelming, Mr. Henderson," she said as they sat in his kitchen reviewing her findings. "This is extraordinary. I've never seen hay preservation results like this. Your oldest samples are testing at 97% of fresh hay nutritional value. That's unheard of for 18-month storage. Most farmers would expect 50 to 60% degradation over that time frame." "The barn works," Marcus said simply. "The barn works spectacularly," Dr. Morrison corrected. "I'm going to write this up for the State Agricultural Journal. I'm also going to recommend that the university send a research team to study this system in detail. If these results can be replicated and verified academically, you've made a significant contribution to agricultural science." Marcus shrugged, uncomfortable with praise but pleased that someone with credentials was taking his work seriously. "I'm happy to cooperate with any research folks want to do. Like I told Robert Chen, we need data from multiple examples to prove this is real and not just a fluke." "It's not a fluke," Dr. Morrison said firmly. "The physics are sound, the execution is excellent, and the results speak for themselves. You should be very proud." After she left, Marcus walked out to the barn and stood at its entrance, looking at the spiral path curving away into shadow. 2 years ago, this had been just an idea, just calculations and hopes, and a stubborn refusal to accept that hay spoilage was inevitable. Now it was real, it was proven, and it was beginning to spread. Robert Chen's barn was showing the same positive results. A third farmer, encouraged by what he had heard, was planning to build a smaller version next spring. The knowledge was escaping into the world, like seeds carried on the wind, landing in receptive soil and taking root. Marcus had not built his barn for recognition or profit. He had built it because it was the right thing to do, because the problem needed solving, because he could not stop himself from trying to make things better. The fact that others were now benefiting from his work was validation enough. That summer of 1989 marked a turning point. Though Marcus did not recognize it as such at the time, Dr. Morrison's article was published in the Nebraska Agricultural Review, a respected journal read by farmers and researchers throughout the Midwest. The article, titled Spiral Architecture for Enhanced Hay Preservation, a case study of the Henderson barn, presented Marcus's design and his 2 years of data in clear scientific terms. The response was immediate and divided. Traditional agricultural engineers were skeptical, arguing that the results must be anomalous or that Marcus's testing methods were flawed. But practical farmers, people who lived with the daily reality of feed preservation challenges, were intensely interested. Marcus began receiving letters and phone calls from across Nebraska and into surrounding states. People wanted to visit, to see the barn, to understand how it worked. Marcus accommodated these visitors as best he could, though he was not naturally inclined toward teaching or publicity. He would show people the barn, explain the principles, answer questions, and provide copies of his plans to anyone who asked. He never charged money, never tried to control the information, never sought credit or recognition. He simply shared what he knew with anyone willing to listen. Frank Paulson, watching this transformation of his neighbor from obscure farmer to minor agricultural celebrity, was amazed by Marcus's humility. Most men would be crowing from the rooftops, Frank said to his wife. Marcus acts like he just fixed a fence, not revolutionized hay storage. That's why people trust him, Frank's wife replied. He's not trying to sell them anything, he's just trying to help. And help he did, though the scale of that help would not become apparent for several more years. By the end of 1989, 5 spiral barns were in operation across Nebraska, each one documenting results similar to Marcus's original structure. The University of Nebraska dispatched a graduate student to study the barns as part of a master's thesis on agricultural innovation and traditional knowledge. The student, a young man named James Wu, spent 6 months visiting the barns, interviewing the farmers, measuring airflow and temperature and humidity, collecting data. His thesis, completed in 1990, confirmed everything Marcus had claimed. The spiral design created superior hay preservation conditions through passive systems that required no electricity and minimal maintenance. The structures were more expensive to build initially, but paid for themselves within 5 years through eliminated spoilage and reduced feed costs. The thesis concluded that spiral barns represented a significant advancement in agricultural infrastructure and recommended their wider adoption. But wider adoption was slow, hindered by the very conservatism of farming culture. Farmers are necessarily cautious people, reluctant to invest in unproven technologies when their livelihoods depend on consistent results. The rectangular barn had worked adequately for generations. Why take a chance on something strange and untested? The answer came in the summer of 1990, when Timber County experienced the worst drought in 70 years. The rain stopped in May of 1990 and did not return for 4 months. The sky remained a pale, bleached blue, cloudless and pitiless. Temperatures soared into the hundreds and stayed there. The topsoil, already depleted from decades of intensive farming, turned to dust and blew away in gritty clouds that choked lungs and covered everything in a fine brown powder. The corn withered in the fields, stalks stunted and leaves curled. The wheat harvest was a disaster, yields down 70% from normal years. The pastures turned brown and crispy, offering no grazing for livestock. And most critically, there would be no hay harvest that year. The alfalfa that farmers depended on to feed their cattle through the winter simply did not grow. The first cutting produced barely enough to bother collecting, and there would be no second or third cuttings. By August, it was clear that farmers were facing a catastrophic feed shortage. Without hay to feed their animals through the coming winter, they would be forced to sell off their herds at devastating losses or watch their cattle starve. The county extension office held an emergency meeting in late August to discuss the crisis. 200 farmers crowded into the high school gymnasium, their faces showing the strain of watching their livelihoods disappear. The mood was grim. Dr. Morrison stood at the front with county officials trying to present options. "The situation is dire," she told them bluntly. "There is no hay to buy. The drought extends across 5 states. What little hay is available is being sold at 5 times the normal price, which most of you cannot afford. The federal government is working on disaster relief, but that takes time and winter does not wait. So, what do? Someone called out from the crowd. "Just give up. Sell everything." Dr. Morrison looked uncomfortable. "Some of you may need to significantly reduce your herds. I know that's not what you want to hear, but the mathematics are brutal. Without feed, you cannot maintain your current livestock numbers." Marcus Henderson sat near the back of the gymnasium, listening. He had not spoken publicly about his situation, but he knew that he was in a different position than most of the farmers in that room. His spiral barn contained 3 years of hay bales stored from the harvests of 1987, 1988, and 1989. The preservation had been so successful that he had not yet needed a continuer to 24 to use the oldest hay, and it remained in perfect condition. He had enough feed to take his cattle through not just one winter, but potentially 2 or 3 winters if necessary. Robert Chen, sitting next to Marcus, leaned over and whispered, "You need to tell them." "Tell them what?" Marcus asked quietly. "That you have hay, that the barn works, that there's a solution here." Marcus shook his head. "Not the time for speeches. People are hurting." "That's exactly why it's the time," Robert insisted. "You can help them. Your hay could make the difference for some of these families." After the meeting, as farmers filed out in depressed silence, Dr. Morrison approached Marcus. "I know you have hay," she said without preamble. "I know your barn has preserved 3 years of storage. These people need to know that." "I'm not going to stand up there and brag about how well prepared I am," Marcus replied. "That would be cruel. It's not bragging to offer solutions," Dr. Morrison said. "And you could do more than just offer your own hay. You could teach people how to store what little hay they can scrape together so it lasts through the winter without spoiling. In a shortage, preservation becomes even more critical." Marcus considered this. She was right, of course. In normal years, farmers could afford to lose 10 or 15% of their hay to spoilage. But in a year like this, every bale would matter. Every pound of feed could mean the difference between a cow surviving or starving. If he could help farmers preserve what little they had, that could make a real difference. "All right," he said finally, "set up another meeting. I'll explain the principles, show them what I've learned. Whether they listen or not is up to them." The second meeting was held 2 weeks later, and it was much smaller, only about 30 farmers who were willing to consider unconventional solutions. Marcus brought his scale model of the barn and large diagrams showing airflow patterns and temperature regulation. He spent 3 hours explaining the physics of preservation, the importance of air circulation, the benefits of thermal mass, the ways to create passive ventilation systems. He also made a more immediate offer. "I've got hay that's 3 years old and still perfect," he told them. "I've got more than I need for my own herd. Anyone who needs hay to get through the winter, I'll sell to you at normal prices, not the inflated drought prices. You pay me when you can, no rush." The room was silent for a moment. Then someone spoke up. Why would you do that, Marcus? You could make a fortune selling that hay on the open market right now. Because I'm not trying to get rich off my neighbor's suffering, Marcus replied. I built the barn to solve a problem. The problem right now is that people need hay. I've got hay. Seems simple to me. Over the following weeks, Marcus sold or gave away nearly half of his stored hay to neighboring farmers. He kept careful records, not for the money, but to ensure fair distribution. Several farmers paid him on the spot, grateful and embarrassed. Others promised to pay when they could, and Marcus trusted them to do so. A few could not pay at all, and Marcus gave them hay anyway, refusing to let livestock starve over money. Frank Paulson was one of those who bought hay from Marcus, and he did so with tears in his eyes. I called you crazy, he said as they loaded bales onto his truck. I told everyone you were wasting your money, and now you're saving my cattle. You weren't wrong to be skeptical, Marcus replied. Skepticism is healthy. Just means I had to prove the idea works. You proved it all right, Frank said. You proved it in the best way possible, when it really mattered. But Marcus's hay alone could not solve the county's problem. There simply was not enough of it to feed every herd through the winter. The crisis continued to deepen as September turned to October. Cattle prices collapsed as desperate farmers tried to sell animals they could not feed. The auction house in the neighboring county reported record volumes and the lowest prices in 30 years. Families that had farmed for generations were being forced to liquidate herds their grandparents had built. That was when Robert Chen and two of the other farmers who had built spiral barns made a decision. They pooled their preserved hay reserves and created a cooperative buying program, selling hay at cost to farmers who were willing to commit to building spiral barns the following year. It was a gamble, an investment in the future of the community's agricultural infrastructure. They did not have enough hay to supply everyone, but they had enough to help a significant number of families make it through the winter. The program came with conditions. Farmers who received hay through the cooperative had to attend construction workshops that Marcus and Robert organized over the winter months. They had to commit to building spiral barns of their own as soon as conditions allowed. They had to agree to share their preservation data with Dr. Morrison for ongoing research. And they had to promise to help their neighbors in turn when the time came. 37 farmers signed up for the program, receiving hay that would keep their herds alive through the winter. Some of them were skeptical about the spiral barn concept, but they were desperate enough to try anything. Others were already convinced by Marcus's example and eager to learn. All of them attended the workshops, held in the high school gymnasium on Saturday afternoons, where Marcus and Robert taught the principles of spiral construction and passive preservation. Tommy Brewster, now running his own small farm, became an unexpected leader in these workshops. He had worked on the first to spiral barns and understood the construction techniques intimately. He was also young enough and energetic enough to inspire other young farmers who might otherwise have been intimidated by Marcus's quiet intensity. Denny Park assisted as well, having learned welding and metal work in the years since helping build Marcus's barn. Together they represented a new generation embracing innovation while respecting traditional knowledge. The winter of 1990-91 was difficult but survivable for those farmers who had secured hay through Marcus's generosity and the cooperative program. Their cattle made it through, thin but alive. Other farmers were not as fortunate. Dozens of operations were forced to sell out entirely, their land bought up by corporate farming interests or simply left fallow. The agricultural landscape of Timber County was permanently changed by that single drought year, but spring brought hope. The rains returned in April, heavy and sustained. The land, given a winter to rest, responded with vigor. The grass greened, the crops sprouted, the world came back to life. And across the county, farmers who had survived the drought began building spiral barns. Marcus found himself in the unexpected role of consultant and advisor to more than 36 construction projects. He traveled from farm to farm, helping people adapt the basic design to their specific needs and resources. Some built smaller versions for sheep or goats instead of cattle. Others modified the design to accommodate existing structures or challenging terrain. Marcus encouraged this experimentation, believing that the core principles were sound enough to survive variation. The construction boom brought other benefits to the community. Local quarries that had been struggling found new demand for limestone. Lumber mills sold beams and roofing materials. Tommy and Danny started a small business building spiral barns professionally, hiring other young people and teaching them the skills. The economic impact rippled outward from the initial crisis, creating jobs and opportunities where there had been desperation just months before. By the harvest of 1991, 17 new spiral barns were operational in Timber County. By 1992, that number had doubled. The distinctive spiral structures became a recognizable feature of the landscape, visible from the highway, marking farms that had embraced innovation. Visitors from other counties and other states came to see them, and the idea continued to spread. Marcus's original barn, now in its 5th year of operation, contained hay that was proving his most optimistic theories. The oldest bales, stored in 1987, remained in excellent condition. He tested them regularly, and the nutritional content was still above 90% of fresh hay. The preservation was not just effective, it was remarkable. Hay could be stored not just for months, but for years, creating true food security for livestock operations. The implications went beyond individual farms. With reliable long-term hay storage, farmers could build reserves during good years to cushion bad years. They could make rational decisions about herd size based on average conditions rather than worst-case scenarios. They could reduce their dependence on expensive supplemental feeds. They could, in essence, gain more control over their economic destiny. Dr. Morrison published a follow-up study in 1992 documenting the impact of spiral barns on the Timber County agricultural economy during and after the drought. Her analysis showed that farms with spiral barns had weathered the crisis significantly better than farms without them. They had maintained larger herds, sold fewer cattle at distressed prices, and recovered more quickly when conditions improved. The economic benefit was quantifiable and substantial. National agricultural magazines began picking up the story. Farm Journal ran a feature article titled "The Barn That Saved a County" with photographs of Marcus standing in front of his spiral structure. Successful Farming published technical plans and construction guidance. Mother Earth News, always interested in alternative and sustainable practices, wrote enthusiastically about the passive systems and environmental benefits. Marcus, uncomfortable with the attention, gave interviews because he understood that publicity would help spread the knowledge faster. The University of Nebraska established a research program specifically to study spiral barn technology and develop optimized designs for different climates and uses. They built experimental structures, tested variations, and created detailed engineering specifications. What had begun as one old man's eccentric project was becoming a subject of serious academic inquiry. Not everyone was convinced, of course. Industrial agriculture companies that manufactured conventional barn systems and mechanical ventilation equipment saw spiral barns as a threat to their business model. They published articles questioning the claims, suggesting that the preservation results were exaggerated or that the construction costs were prohibitive. Some agricultural engineers, invested in modern mechanical systems, dismissed the spiral design as backwards-looking nostalgia. But farmers, the people who actually had to store hay and feed cattle, were pragmatic. They looked at the results, calculated the costs, and made their own decisions. Many continued with conventional systems and willing or unable to make the investment in spiral construction. But a significant minority, particularly younger farmers open to new ideas and older farmers who had learned hard lessons from the drought, chose to build spirals. By 1995, there were over 200 spiral barns in operation across Nebraska, Kansas, Iowa, South Dakota, and Wyoming. The design had evolved and adapted to regional conditions. In Kansas, where tornadoes were common, engineers had strengthened the structures with additional anchoring. In Wyoming, where extreme cold was the challenge, builders had increased the thermal mass of the walls. In Iowa, where moisture was more of an issue, they had refined the ventilation systems. The core principles remained constant, but the applications diversified. Marcus, now 71 years old, watched this spread with quiet satisfaction. His barn had been in operation for 8 years, and he now had conclusive proof that hay could be stored for extended periods without degradation. He had bales from 1987 that were still feeding his cattle in 1995, 8-year-old hay that remained nutritionally sound. It was unprecedented in agricultural science, and it had been accomplished with no electricity, no moving parts, no complex machinery. Just stone and wood and the patient application of physical principles. Helen would have loved to see this, he thought often. She had believed in him when he was just sketching ideas in notebooks, when the barn was just a crazy dream. She had encouraged him to trust his instincts, to build what he knew was right regardless of what others thought. Her faith in him had made everything possible. In 1996, the Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Program, a USDA-funded initiative, awarded Marcus a grant to document his work and create educational materials for farmers nationwide. The grant was modest, $5,000, but it came with institutional recognition and support. Marcus used the money to hire a technical writer and a photographer to create a comprehensive manual on spiral barn construction and operation. The manual, published in 1997, was titled Spiral Architecture for Agricultural Storage, Principles, Plans, and Practice. It included everything Marcus had learned over 10 years, detailed plans at multiple scales, troubleshooting guidance, construction techniques, preservation data, and economic analysis. The manual was distributed free through county extension offices and was made available online as the internet became more accessible to rural communities. Marcus also worked with James Wu, the graduate student who had studied the barns years earlier and was now an assistant professor at the University of Nebraska, to establish a certification program for spiral barn builders. The program ensured that construction met certain standards for safety and effectiveness while allowing for regional adaptation. Tommy and Danny's construction company became the first certified builder, and they trained others to maintain quality as demand grew. By the turn of the millennium, 13 years after Marcus broke ground on his original barn, spiral storage structures had become an established alternative in American agriculture. They remained a minority of storage systems, perhaps 5% of new construction, but they had proven their worth sufficiently that they were no longer considered eccentric. Agricultural lending institutions recognized them as sound investments. Insurance companies developed specific policies for them. They had entered the mainstream, at least in the Great Plains states. Marcus celebrated the new century quietly, alone on his farm, feeding cattle with hay that had been stored for varying lengths of time, the oldest now 12 years in the barn. He was 76 years old, still healthy and active but conscious of time's passage. He thought about legacy, about what would remain after he was gone. The barn would remain, certainly. It was built to last for generations, the stone walls and heavy timber construction designed for longevity. But more important than the physical structure was the knowledge, the understanding that there were better ways to solve old problems if you were willing to question assumptions and do the work to prove new theories. In 2002, Marcus received an unexpected honor. The American Society of Agricultural Engineers, the very people who had initially dismissed his work, presented him with their Pioneer Award for Innovation in Agricultural Infrastructure. The ceremony was held in Chicago, and Marcus, who had rarely left Nebraska in his life, flew there to accept. He gave a brief speech, uncomfortable with the attention but determined to say something meaningful. "I didn't build the spiral barn to win awards," he told the assembled engineers and farmers. "I built it because I was tired of watching good hay rot. I built it because I thought there had to be a better way, and I was stubborn enough to try to find it." The barn worked, but the real success isn't the barn itself. The real success is that other people took the idea and made it their own, improved it, adapted it, spread it. That's how progress happens. Not by one person having a brilliant idea and protecting it, but by many people sharing knowledge and building on each other's work. I'm just glad I got to be part of that process. The speech was recorded and later shared widely in agricultural education programs. It captured Marcus's philosophy perfectly. Innovation was not about individual glory, but about collective advancement. Problems were solved not by geniuses working in isolation, but by communities sharing knowledge and supporting experimentation. Marcus Henderson died peacefully in his sleep on a cold January night in 2007 at the age of 83. He was found the next morning by Frank Paulson, who had continued the tradition of coffee visits to the end. The funeral was held at the Methodist Church, the same church where Martha Greenwood had once organized prayers for his troubled mind. The church was packed with farmers and engineers, researchers and reporters, people who had known Marcus personally and people who had only known his work. Frank Paulson gave the eulogy, his voice breaking as he spoke about his friend. Marcus taught me that being wrong is okay as long as you're willing to admit it and learn from it. He taught me that innovation doesn't have to be complicated or expensive, it just has to work. And he taught me that the best way to help your neighbors is to solve the problems you all face together. He was a good man, a smart man, and a hell of a farmer. We're going to miss him. The spiral barn, of course, remained on Marcus's property. It was purchased by Tommy Brewster, who had bought the farm and continued operating it according to Marcus's methods. Tommy maintained the barn meticulously, knowing that it was a piece of history, a testament to one man's vision and stubbornness. Visitors still came to see it, agricultural students and curious farmers, people who had heard the story and wanted to see the reality. Inside the barn, hay continued to be stored and preserved using the passive systems Marcus had designed 20 years earlier. The limestone walls still regulated temperature and humidity. The spiral airflow still prevented stagnation and moisture accumulation. The structure still functioned exactly as intended, requiring only basic maintenance, no electricity, no complex repairs. It had fulfilled Marcus's vision completely, a barn that would outlast him and continue serving its purpose long after he was gone. By 2010, 3 years after Marcus's death, there were over 800 spiral barns in operation across the United States, with additional examples in Canada, Australia, and even experimental structures in Africa and South America. The design had proven adaptable to different climates and scales, from small homesteads to large commercial operations. The core principles of passive preservation through spiral architecture had been validated repeatedly in diverse conditions. The economic impact was significant but difficult to quantify precisely. Farmers using spiral barns reported hay loss rates below 2% compared to the industry average of 12 to 15%. Over time, this translated to substantial savings in feed costs and reduced need for supplemental nutrition. One economic analysis estimated that the collective benefit of spiral barns to American agriculture exceeded $50 million annually. Though this figure did not account for intangible benefits like improved animal health and increased operational flexibility. The environmental benefits were also noteworthy. By eliminating the need for mechanical ventilation and climate control, spiral barns reduced energy consumption associated with hay storage to essentially zero. They were built primarily from local natural materials, limestone and timber, which had much lower carbon footprints than industrial building materials. And by reducing hay waste, they decreased the overall land and resource requirements for livestock feed production. Perhaps most significantly, spiral barns represented a successful example of sustainable innovation rooted in observation of natural systems. Marcus had not invented anything new so much as he had recognized and applied principles that existed in nature: the efficiency of spirals, the effectiveness of thermal mass, the power of passive air movement. His genius lay in synthesis and application rather than invention, in seeing connections that others had missed. The story of the spiral barn became a case study in agricultural innovation, taught in university programs and discussed in policy circles. It demonstrated that progress in farming did not necessarily require high technology or massive capital investment. Sometimes the best solutions were elegant applications of simple physics built with traditional materials and methods designed to work with nature rather than against it. In 2015, on the 50th anniversary of Marcus Henderson's marriage to Helen, a group of farmers and researchers gathered at the original spiral barn for a commemoration event. Frank Paulson, now 93 years old and still sharp, spoke about his friend and neighbor. Robert Chen, retired but still involved in sustainable agriculture advocacy, presented research showing that farms using spiral preservation systems had weathered the drought of 2012 significantly better than farms without them, echoing the pattern from 1990. Dr. Patricia Morrison, who had been the first researcher to validate Marcus's work, had passed away in 2011, but her successor at the university presented an update on ongoing research into spiral architecture applications. Scientists were now studying whether similar principles could be applied to other storage needs, from grain silos to vegetable root cellars to even refrigeration systems. The fundamental insight that spirals created superior airflow and temperature regulation was finding new applications decades after Marcus's original work. Tommy Brewster, who had been 24 years old when he helped build the first spiral barn and was now 52, spoke about what the barn meant to him personally. "I was just a kid looking for work when Marcus hired me," he said. "I thought I was just going to haul some stones and make some money. Instead, I got an education in thinking differently, in questioning assumptions, in building things that last. Everything I know about farming, I learned from Marcus Henderson. Everything I know about being a good neighbor, I learned watching how he treated people. This barn changed my life, and I'm not the only one who can say that." The barn itself, now 28 years old, stood as proof of the design's longevity. The limestone walls were as solid as the day they were built, slightly weathered but structurally sound. The cedar roof had been replaced once, in 2005, but the underlying structure was unchanged. The interior environment continued to preserve hay effectively, with bales stored for 5, 6, 7 years showing minimal degradation. The barn had exceeded its design lifespan and showed no signs of failing. More spiral barns continue to be built every year, though the rate had stabilized at a steady level rather than the explosive growth of the 1990s. The design had found its niche in the agricultural ecosystem, not universal, but widely adopted by farmers who valued long-term sustainability over short-term cost minimization, who were willing to invest in infrastructure that would serve their children and grandchildren. In remote areas where electricity was expensive or unreliable, spiral barns became particularly popular. On organic farms and sustainable agriculture operations, they were common. In regions prone to extreme weather, they were valued for their resilience. They had become part of the fabric of American agriculture, no longer revolutionary, but simply another option in the toolkit of farming methods. Marcus Henderson's legacy extended beyond the physical barns, though. His story became a teaching tool about innovation, persistence, and community. Business schools studied his approach to sharing knowledge rather than seeking profit from intellectual property. Engineering programs analyzed his problem-solving methodology, working backwards from desired outcomes to determine necessary physical principles. Sustainable agriculture courses examined his integration of traditional materials and modern understanding. The lesson that resonated most strongly was about the value of questioning conventional wisdom. Marcus had not accepted that hay spoilage was inevitable. He had not believed that mechanical systems were the only solution to environmental control. He had trusted his own observations and analysis over the voices of skeptics and experts who told him he was wrong. And crucially, he had been willing to risk his own resources to prove his theories, to build the barn even when everyone thought he was crazy. But the story also illustrated the importance of sharing knowledge. Marcus could have patented his design, could have tried to commercialize it, could have gotten wealthy from his innovation. Instead, he gave away his plans and his time, helped others build their own barns, created a community of practitioners who improved and adapted the core concepts. This generosity multiplied the impact of his work far beyond what individual profit-seeking could have achieved. By 2020, more than 1,000 spiral barns dotted the landscape across North America. They ranged from small structures storing a few dozen bales for hobby farms to massive installations on commercial ranches storing thousands of tons of hay. Each one was a variation on Marcus Henderson's original vision, adapted to local conditions but built on the same fundamental principles he had discovered through observation and experiment. The drought that began in 2021 tested the spiral barn system once again. Like the drought of 1990, it was severe and prolonged, stretching across multiple states and lasting through to growing seasons. Hay production collapsed, prices skyrocketed, and farmers faced the same terrible decisions about whether to sell herds or watch animals starve. But this time, the outcome was different. Farms with spiral barns had reserves, hay stored for 3, 4, 5 years that remained in perfect condition. They were able to maintain their herds, support their neighbors, and weather the crisis without catastrophic losses. The economic impact was still severe, but the human cost was dramatically lower than it had been 30 years earlier. Communities that had invested in spiral storage infrastructure survived where they might otherwise have failed. Frank Paulson did not live to see this vindication, having passed away peacefully in 2019 at the age of 97. But he had lived long enough to know that his friend Marcus had been right all along, that the spiral barn was not a folly but a fundamental improvement in agricultural practice. In his final years, Frank had become an advocate for the design, telling anyone who would listen about the day Marcus Henderson had marked out a spiral in the earth and changed farming forever. The original spiral barn celebrated its 40th anniversary in 2027. For decades of continuous operation, preserving hay through droughts and floods, blizzards, and heat waves, maintaining its function without electricity or complex maintenance. Tommy Brewster, now 64 years old and thinking about retirement, stood in the barn and marveled at its persistence. The limestone walls had developed a beautiful patina, the golden color deepened and enriched by 4 decades of weather. The interior smelled of hay and stone and time, a smell that Tommy associated with stability and security. He thought about Marcus, gone now for 20 years, and how proud the old man would be to see this structure still working perfectly, still serving its purpose, still proving that simple, elegant solutions could outlast complex ones. Research continued into spiral architecture principles. The University of Nebraska maintained an active program studying applications beyond hay storage. A team of engineers had designed a spiral warehouse system for general agricultural storage that used the same passive climate control principles. Another group was working on residential applications, spiral cellars for homeowners wanting to store food without refrigeration. The fundamental insight that Marcus had applied to hay barns was proving broadly applicable. In 2028, the Smithsonian Institution requested permission to document the original Henderson barn as part of their American Innovation Collection. Historians, engineers, and photographers spent weeks at the site, recording every detail, interviewing Tommy and the few remaining people who had known Marcus personally. The barn was designated a National Historic Landmark, recognized for its significance to agricultural history and American ingenuity.